So now let's talk about some other elements that this software, for instance in Lightroom, what it can do, and we're talking color management, color correction here, and what else we can do with raw files in Lightroom.
Sure.
Have you got some examples?
Absolutely, Struan. We can have a look at an example of how Lightroom can be really, really effective with something that we like to call batch processing, which is about having a sequence of images that all have the same problem. Traditionally in the past, we used to have to basically take one image at a time and fix them, do the same thing to every image. Programs like Lightroom and Aperture have really, really turned that over and made it a lot faster and a lot simpler. So let's have a look.
Okay.
All right, so here we find ourselves in Lightroom with our 4 images that have been taken in a studio or in a light tent. And we've got a couple of consistent problems among all these images. The photographer underexposed the images by accident, and the white balance was off. And we can sort of get an idea of this just by looking at our thumbnails. Now, the images are also naturally laying on their sides. So we're in a situation where all of these images basically required the same adjustment because the lighting situation was fixed and the camera settings were not changed in between photographs. Batch processing is one of the strengths of a program like Lightroom. So let's have a look at what we can do to fix this in a very efficient way. So what we can do to get started is we can basically select all of our images. So I've selected our first picture here of this doll. I'm holding down the Shift key and I click on the last image, so all of my images are now selected. So what I'm going to do here is come to the first image, and you'll notice when I hover my mouse inside it, I've got 2 little arrows, little curved arrows here in the lower corners. These are rotation arrows. So I need to rotate this first picture in a clockwise direction, so I'm just going to click on the clockwise direction arrow, but because I've got all the images selected, they all rotate with one click. So that's our first problem solved. Now we need to get into correcting our color balance and our exposure problem. So to do this, I'm going to select our first picture, which is the doll, and I'm going to need to go from our library module in Lightroom to our develop module. Our develop module is really where we do our heavy lifting in terms of making picture adjustments. So here we go. I'm going to click on develop, and in a moment here we get the picture of our doll. So in the Develop module, on the right-hand side, you'll notice a plethora of tools and icons here. And these are basically all of the tools that we have to make adjustments in Lightroom. And so starting at the top, we're going to see here what we call our basic adjustment brick right here. All of these bricks are collapsible and expandable by clicking on these little triangles. Okay, so I'm just going to click open this basic panel here, this basic brick panel, and what I want to do first is do a color correction. Now in this case, because the shot was taken in a light tent, the interior of the light tent I know was white, so I've got a white reference for this series of images, and because of that I can conveniently use Lightroom's eyedropper tool. So I'm just going to click on this little device here, and what I want to do is I want to click on something in the image that should have been white, gray, or black in the real world. Now because I know the inside of that tent should have been white in the real world, I can use it to click on. So I'm just going to click here, and you'll notice that that Lightroom instantly applies a color correction. Now if by chance your own feelings as a photographer say, well, it is neutral, sure, but I think I like a little bit of a cooler cast or a warmer cast for whatever reason, you can, after using the eyedropper, go to the temperature and tint sliders. So if I want a little bit of a warmer feel to it, I can click and drag to the right for a warmer feel. I can click and drag to the left for a cooler feel, wherever I want to go. So I'm going to go back to more or less where I was here. Again, if I want to go back to the pure neutral rendition of this image, I can always go back to the eyedropper and click once again on that background that I know should have been white in the real world. So problem 1 is fixed. The other problem that I've got here is that the image is a little too dark. The photographer noticed only afterwards, when it was too late, that all of the images were underexposed by a full stop. Now I can get an idea of this visually on my screen, but I can also sort of get a hint of this in the histogram. The histogram, for most images, should cover from left to right throughout this little area here in the histogram. You can see that I've got a peak, which represents the majority of my pixels, here in the middle of the histogram. I'm kind of thinking it should belong over here a little bit more towards the right. So As I said, the photographer found out later, after the fact, that the picture was underexposed by a stop. When I come down here to Lightroom's exposure control, I've got a slider here, and I've got some numbers here that kind of indicate values. Well, the interesting thing about the exposure slider in Lightroom is that the numbers in full values represent stops. So for example, with my mouse here in the area, you'll notice that the numbers are highlighted. If I go to my up arrow key, every click of the up arrow key will allow me to increase the exposure by 1/10 of a stop. So I'm just going to keep on going here with my up arrow key until I get to +1.0. That means more or less the equivalent of +1 f-stops on my camera. So at this point, I might be satisfied with my exposure and my color balance. I'm now ready to apply this one correction here to all of the remaining shots that I took in the studio there. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come on down here to my film strip. I'm going to hold down my Command key, or it could be my Control key on a Windows computer, and I'm going to select the remaining images. Now, if you look carefully, this may or may not appear in the video all that clearly, but if you have a careful look, you'll notice that the first image I selected is highlighted in this white sort of indicator. This is Lightroom's way of saying the picture of the doll is more selected than the remaining 3. Now, this is very, very important because the item, in this case the doll, that is more selected, that is where the adjustments are going to come from. The items that are not as selected, i.e. a slightly darker selected indicator, these images here are going to receive the adjustments. Okay? So they're going to come from the doll and they're going to be received in the other 3 images. Now, to make that actually happen, all I need to do in Lightroom is come over here to this button here that says Sync. I click on Sync, and in the next step, I've got a dialog box called Synchronize Settings, and it's here where I can literally cherry pick any and all the adjustments that I've made. So I can literally disable certain adjustments and enable others, or I can simply check all of them. In this case, I've only done 2 real adjustments here, so I'm just going to click on Check None and just enable both white balance and my tone corrections. You can see here that exposure is definitely one of them. At this point, I click on Synchronize, and in a second or two down here, you'll notice in the film strip, all images have been corrected. Let's have a closer look here in the library module. I'm going to go back to the library module where my thumbnails are. I'm just going to make them a little bigger there, but as you can see, all of the pictures are now adjusted with the same correction.